Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jones, and joining me is Phil Boyle. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing good, Phil.
Well, Phil and I always have conversations throughout the week about certain topics, and we decided to turn that into basically a weekly discussion that we're going to let you guys in on. So, Phil, what topic would you like to talk about this week?
I want to talk to you about HDR on projectors, Phil. And what I want to know is, does it really make a difference?
You know what? And we've had this conversation a couple of times because I know, Phil, just like me, sometimes you'll get a projector and you look at the SDR and the HDR and they look basically the same. Or often the HDR looks worse. So, and that is because projectors are challenged when it comes to playing back HDR material that's developed for a flat panel display.
So why is that? What's the number? Let's tell our viewers who are considering buying a projector why that is.
Well, if you think about HDR material is developed for a flat panel projector that can get much, much, much brighter. So because of that, when they master HDR material, they're trying to master it to utilize the entire brightness range of a direct emitting display. Flat, LCD, OLED, whatever those types of displays are. And it's mastered for that. However, a projector does not have that brightness range. It cannot hit those brightnesses on a giant screen. So what the director and the content creator intended for you to see, and he chose on a flat panel, just a lot of times doesn't come out looking right on a projector.
So obviously HDR is a big feature, though, for all the major and minor projector manufacturers. They're putting this feature on there. And even though we say in our reviews, HDR is really hard to do on a projector, it's almost like the manufacturers are doubling down because first you had, HDR, the HDR10 with HLG, and now you've got Dolby Vision and HDR10 plus with the dynamic metadata. What should people believe?
Okay, so the fact is, think about HDR as I am providing instructions, right? I can tell a car to go 300 miles an hour. Doesn't mean that it can do it. It can understand what you want me to do. Doesn't mean that I can actually do it. So the goal is with HDR is to try to extract the absolute maximum from the projector's capabilities. It's the maximum brightness, the maximum contrast, the maximum color reproduction that projector can do. The fact is, most direct emitting displays, most OLEDs and LCDs cannot accurately display all of the brightness and color that's found in HDR content, especially stuff that's mastered in 4,000 nits and, DCI-P3 or Rec 2020. It can't do it. So it's just going to try to extract as much of it as possible, and so does a projector. But a lot of times, because you're looking at a projector, they just can't do the brightnesses on those large screens, and it just doesn't look as good as it could.
So that leads me to my next question, because right behind me, I don't know if you can see it on camera, this projector is the latest Hisense L9H, which we just reviewed, and you and I put through its testing, and it actually does a good job with HDR. So what do you think it is about that projector that makes it do such a good job, and other projectors that you can actually see a difference?
So I know I'm going to piss off a lot of reviewers and a lot of enthusiasts, but the fact is a projector cannot accurately reproduce HDR.
Right.
Flat panels cannot accurately reduce most HDR. Why? Because it's using tone mapping. Tone mapping is a way of trying to take what the projector cannot do and all of the brightness and color and fit it into what the projector can do. So you told me to do 300 miles an hour. I can do 125. You told me to pick this crayon. I don't have that crayon, so I picked this crayon, right? And hopefully the choices I make give you most of the impact that the director or the content creator or the colorist or the person that mastered the content wanted you to actually get from that material. So now tone mapping becomes a preference. And certain manufacturers are just better at tone mapping than others. So they're better at taking that material and shrinking it down to the point where it looks impactful and HDR-like, on your projectors. And that also depends on if the projector has dynamic tone mapping or static tone mapping, and even the type of material that the projector can play back.
Okay, so hang tight one second for those people watching, because talk a little bit about what tone mapping is. Okay, just high level.
Okay, so if you think about SDR material was developed for back when flat panels had limited brightness, right?
Standard dynamic range.
Yeah, so standard dynamic range. So think of it as, they used to call it 100 nits, right? 100 nits of brightness is about 29 foot candles or foot lamparts for you projector idiots out there like me, right? So it was easy for a projector and a display to do that, right? And so 0 to 100 nits. And the projector could do it, the flat panel could do it, no problem. Now you have this thing called gamma, where in a brighter room or a darker room, you may move that 0 to 100 back and forth. So maybe it's, boosted to, 5 to 105, that range, which is still 100 in a brighter room, and then crank it back to 0 to 100 in a darker room, which is why dark rooms use gamma 2.4, and maybe in a room with some ambient light, we choose 2.2. And if your room has brightness, your gamma is 2.0. All you're doing is shifting that 100 nits back and forth. Problem with projectors is HDR is now 0 to 4,000 nits.
Right.
Even if I look at a 1,000 nit signal, that is 291 foot lamparts. That's freaking bright, right? If you look at 4,000 nits, you're talking at close to 1,200, foot candles. That is a tremendous amount of brightness. Now, when it comes to HDR, we're not using all of that brightness all the time. Remember, it may be a star or a reflection off of a car that hits that number, but the signal is mastered for that, right? Projectors can't do it. So what they do is they look at it and say, instead of it being this straight line of 0 to 1,000, I'm going to kind of put a bend in it. So I'm going to use more of my brightness at the bottom where most of the content is, and then I'm going to roll off the amount of brightness at the very top, at that the sun or the star, the reflection. So you still see it, but it isn't as bright as it would have been when they mastered it. So they take this straight line of information that every pixel has a certain brightness and a certain color point, and then they try to show you as much of that as possible, and then start trying to kind of bend it off. So you can either bend it off this way or bend it off that way. So you get to see it, but it may not have that same amount of brightness or punch that it would have had if you watched it on a flat panel or on a master display. That's tone mapping. Now, depending on whether the signal is dark or it's a dark movie, like if you're just watching something like Blade Runner, or it's super bright, like you're watching something like The Meg, the projector should make different tone mapping decisions. Many of them cannot. Some of the better ones can.
Okay. And then, of course, there's different types of tone mapping too, right? I mean, there's various ranges based upon...
depends on the projector, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about it. So most projectors utilize static tone mapping. The manufacturer looks at it and says, okay, I think if I use this curve, it'll look good on most material. And then they'll give you a little bit of an adjustment, maybe an HDR brightness level where you could actually adjust it a little bit. Darker movies, you may crank it up. Brighter movies, highlights are blown out, I may crank it down. And I end up having to sometimes ride that little knob based on what I'm watching, right? Or you can do what's called dynamic tone mapping, where the projector actually measures the scene, either frame by frame or scene by scene, and then makes adjustments to its curve based on the brightness information that is in that signal. Anybody that's ever had a camera, take a real digital camera, take out digital camera, and there's a little thing called the waveform monitor, and you can actually, if you bring that up on your camera, you see all these little, it looks like little waves and stuff. It'll actually show you when you're looking at your video camera. If you have an iPhone, you can actually do it too. You can see how the camera is actually measuring the brightness and information that's in the scene. Well, if a camera can do it on the fly on your phone, a smart projector should be able to do it as well, or a smart TV. So now the projector knows what the brightness is in the scene. It knows what it can do, and that video processor applies a different curve based on what it's actually seeing. And theoretically, that means you're not riding a remote control, and you get dark movies look great and bright movies look great.
Okay, so you've got dynamic tone mapping, and you've got static tone mapping. Is that any connection to the difference between like HDR10 and HDR10 plus, where HDR10 plus or Dolby Vision, they do dynamic metadata?
HDR10 is the foundation for HDR10 plus and Dolby Vision. The formulas are the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is HDR10 gives you a static metadata. They theoretically should give you information about the brightest pixel in the scene and the brightest average frame, the whole frame. Look at what's the brightest frame in this movie and what's the brightest pixel in this movie. And then the projector should use that to make an adjustment. A lot of times projectors just ignore it, but it's actually there, right? It's called max fall and max whatever, CLL. The next one would be dynamic metadata, where scene by scene, frame by frame, that is embedded into the signal. Dolby Vision has it embedded, and HDR10 Plus has it embedded. The best way to think about it is think about Dolby Vision would be Coca-Cola, and HDR10 Plus is Pepsi. The idea is the same. It's just one of them I got to pay Dolby for, and a lot of companies that want to pay Dolby, so they came up with this almost this other version that they can use without having to pay the rights. Oh, and by the way, there's another one that is just dynamic metadata, which might as well be, you get the can of Coke that says Coke written on it. It's white and it says cola. Yeah, it's generic. There's actually that one too. So eventually you're going to start seeing that one. But that information is now provided to the projector. It's easier for the projector because the projector doesn't have to make those decisions and measure. But I always say if you have a smart projector, I don't need you to tell me what 2 + 2 is. I can measure the stuff myself. So the better brands, like JVC is a classic example of that. You'll find in LGs, you'll find in other projectors from other manufacturers. They're more than smart enough because they're using a TV video processor or a high-end video processor to measure it. I don't need your metadata. So to me, whether it's measured from the projector or it's provided by the manufacturer, both of them do help with what you're doing when you're watching the movies. However, it still isn't going to work as well as it does on a TV, and we can talk about that after this too.
But I think the point is that for me, when you've got, what, this brings me to the next question. Okay, so you've explained, we talked about HDR and why it's more difficult on a projector than a display, but and what dynamic tone mapping is. But when you're looking to buy a home theater projector and beyond, should it be an ultra short throw or a long throw or a short throw? Let's assume they figured all that out. When somebody's shopping for technology, and they know they want to be able to leverage HDR as much as you can on a projector, because that's the point here. There is a benefit to having HDR on a projector, even though it's hard to do, and even though it's not as good as a flat panel display, it can make a difference if you have the right features and, I guess, more specifications in the projector you're buying. So broadly, what would you say that somebody should look for?
Contrast is important. The ability shades of gray, right? The ability to see details in the shadows and information in the highlights. So good contrast, good native contrast is important. That is, if I have a black box and a white box on the same screen, what's the difference between that bright white box and that black spot on the screen? That is native contrast. Dynamic contrast is I turn the projector down to nothing and the bulb goes down, and I turn it up to really bright and the bulb goes up. That does help a little bit, but native contrast is the most important, is very, very important
So what do you do if a manufacturer doesn't post native contrast? Because a lot of them don't.
The reason why they don't, because the number isn't very good. So
So
the
what
best
does the
way to
consumer
explain it,
do?
the most expensive thing to get on a projector is native contrast. If you look at the ones, the JVCs, the Sonys, the Barcos, the Christies, the ones that have great native contrast, they are expensive, right? And what you're paying for is really, really good panels, imagers, color science, all the stuff you need to develop true native contrast. And that costs a lot of money. So a lot of times you may look at it and say, why is this projector? They're both 2,000 or 3,000 ANSI lumens, and this one is triple, quadruple the cost of the other one. That is because of the ability to do native contrast. And a lot has to do with black. It's easy to make something bright on a projector. It's hard to make it bright and still have good blacks. That's a premium thing. So native contrast. The next thing is proper color tracking. You want to be able to utilize the colors properly. When I'm watching SDR material, I don't want those colors to be overemphasized. But then when I'm watching SDR material, I don't want those colors to be overemphasized. When I go to HDR, I want the colors to be as close to what the creator intended as possible. That's good color tracking. One of the things that I've noticed is people see tricolor laser and they think it's gonna be great. I should get that. It's almost like giving a baby a box of 500 different crayons. They don't know how to use them versus an artist. So what you may end up using is every time they pick red, they pick the brightest red, and that may not be the right color. So a lot of times tricolor laser projectors make everything look cartoonish and unnatural. So it's really difficult to be able to color. So properly tracking colors, properly being able to deliver great native contrast and a decent amount of color balance. Red, green, and blue should be pretty balanced, which means so I don't look green and you don't look blue, right? So those are the three things you should look at. And of course, if it can support more formats, great. This means that if you do get some HDR10 plus or some Dolby Vision material, that's great. But at the same time, if I get that material and it tells the projector what to do and the projector does it inaccurately, who cares? Right.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question, which is the type of HDR you should be looking for. So most manufacturers, with few exceptions, for example, I'm thinking AWOL Vision. AWOL Vision supports every kind of HDR encoding that exists. And that's sort of a kitchen sink approach. So does that mean that if I buy a projector that does not support, let's say, HDR10 plus, but it does support Dolby Vision, what's going to happen when I tune into Amazon and I turn on the latest season of Jack Reacher, which is encoded in HDR10 plus? What happens?
Okay, so as we mentioned, all HDR10 plus and Dolby Vision are the foundation of that is HDR10. So it's all backwards compatible. So if you're watching something on Disney Plus or Amazon that says, Dolby Vision on it, it's going, or even IMAX Enhanced is going to be backwards compatible to HDR10. So that's not going to be a problem. You're still going to be able to watch it. You may not get all of the metadata to provide your projector, but you'll still be able to watch it. Now, even this whole thing, people go, well, wow, now because Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus is on projectors, problem solved. Not really. The only way that you can accurately tone map something is if you know the maximum brightness and how that that object display is going to behave, when I feed it this signal, right? That works on a flat panel TV because a flat panel TV is its own enclosed ecosystem, right? So whether the room is bright, dark, all that stuff, the black level that projector can do when I put a scope on it or watch it in the dark is going to be, I know what it is. It's a 55-inch screen TV, and this 55-inch TV can do 1,250 nits. I know that's the maximum, and it's always going to be the maximum. With a projector, okay, on a 100-inch screen, it may be 250. On a 120-inch screen, it may be 200. On a 120-inch screen with a gain of 1.5, it may be 300. On a 120-inch screen with a gain of 0.8, it could be 192. So but because the projector is now at the mercy of the room and the screen size, that there is no fixed brightness that the Dolby Vision that you can use in the math, to do Dolby Vision or HDR10 plus. So while theoretically it does make it better, unless I can put in those other factors, size of the screen, gain that's on the screen, all of those things is a problem. Companies like AWOL and stuff recommend you use their screens is because they know if I buy this, LTV 3500 Pro and it's being played back on my 120-inch screen that I make that has this gain, I know what the overall brightness and capability is going to be, and I can better tone map it. So a lot of times you may see a projector that has the ability to Dolby Vision and HDR10 plus, but if it doesn't ship with its own screen, or you're not using the manufacturer's screen, it may not know what zero is. It's almost like trying to do math without knowing what absolute zero is, because if it's off, all of your equations are going to be off.
So more and more, not every, but more manufacturers, are still the fewer than the majority. It's not the norm, but more manufacturers like Hisense, like you mentioned, AWOL Vision, even BenQ with their latest ultra short throw RGB laser projector, they packaged a screen, a high gain screen with it. I think it was a promotion, but bottom line is that use this screen. This is going to give you the best results. But not everybody does that. I mean, somebody may already have a screen and they're upgrading their projector. So you said that contrast is important. Native contrast is important. Brightness is certainly important. I think it's probably less important. I mean, there's sort of like a threshold. You should, is it fair to say that around 2,500 to 3,000, 2,500 to 3,000 ANSI lumens is a decent range to get good HDR, as good as you can get on a projector?
Go back to the math we talked about, right? So 100 nits, which is what you use for SDR, standard dynamic range, is 29 foot lamperts. No problem for a projector. 1,000 nits is 291 foot lamperts. If I have a projector that can do 291 foot lamperts on a screen, right? And it delivers decent contrast, and I'm looking at 1,000 nit massive material, I don't have to tone map it because the points are there. The only problem is most likely I'm not going to get those darker points because they can't do the black levels, but I don't have to change any of the points because this pixel at 900 anti-lumens, I can do it. Or 900 nits, I can do it. So as I add more brightness, my tone mapping can be less aggressive. So when projectors came out a few years ago doing HDR, and a bright home theater projector from a Sony or a JVC was 1,500 ANSI lumens, I have to apply far more aggressive tone mapping than the newer models they're launching that are now in the 3,000 ANSI lumen range.
Right.
And as they do that, better manufacturers as they're adding that brightness, are really, really working hard to not have it impact the other side, which is the black levels. So as these projectors get brighter and brighter and brighter, it applies less tone mapping. I tell you, the best HDR picture I've ever seen in my entire life is a Sony GTZ380. It's a 10,000 ANSI lumen projector on a 140-inch 0.8 screen. And the black levels were great, and it looked like a giant flat panel. So if you looked at a nice LCD panel and you said, wow, look at the HDR on that. How come projectors don't look like that? It looked just like that because it had the brightness capabilities. Now, it does impact your blacks, but they're working on that. The brightness is the easy part. Now it's working on making better SXRD panels, better LCOS panels, better DLA panels to keep the brightness. The brightness goes this way. The black level still stays back over here. We don't want to do this. We want to take that brightness and do this while maintaining the black levels. And you're starting to see that better. There's going to be better DLP chips coming. there's going to be better laser, and as those better DLP chips come and you can buy it and better panels come, you're going to be able to increase that brightness on a 3 LCD, LCOS, even a DLP, while still maintaining great black levels. And as it gets brighter and brighter and brighter, you get less tone mapping required, and it looks better and better and better. One last thing before we go. When we talk about HDR, they use this term called color volume. And color volume is color plus brightness. So think of Ferrari in the sunlight, Ferrari in the shadows, right? That's color volume. I got to be able to reproduce that color Ferrari red, whether I'm looking at it in a dark spot or in a bright sun. That's a huge amount of color volume, right? A lot of times, neon does not look like neon on a projector. It looks like a reproduction of neon. On a really bright, high lumens flat panel, it looks like neon. You know why? Because neon is a combination of the color of red and that red being displayed at a certain amount of brightness. So as you add more brightness, you start getting all of the color volume, and things are going to start looking more and more like nature. So you don't need all that brightness all the time, but when I'm trying to show something like neon or a London bus in on a sunny day, that's where you want that extra brightness. Now, if I have to sacrifice anything, I would rather sacrifice that super bright color, because think about a movie, probably 2%, 1% of everything is probably going to have a color like that. So Don't sacrifice all of your quality for everything else to try to hit that one color that happens in that scene one time. What you should be concerned with is the 90% of what you're watching. So a lot of times, if you calibrate a projector to track HDR perfectly, it looks like garbage. If you're concerned about that highlight and the projector that does the highlight best, that does not clip highlights, is normally not the better looking HDR projector. It's the one that tests better. Because guess what? It hits the highlight. Because guess what? It went from 0 to 100. Look, it's the better projector. No, it's the one that when I'm watching the person's face, when I'm watching the person in a suit, when I'm looking at the characters on screen, the stuff that I truly care about, it looks right. And if that highlight is blown out, who cares? That is a manufacturer's decision. And some manufacturers say, I'll blow out that highlight to maintain the rest of the material. And some say, I'm going to maintain that highlight. That is a manufacturer's choice. So it's not reference, it's preference. So you need to pick the projector that you believe you prefer to look at the picture.
So it sounds to me like what people that are considering buying a projector should do, if HDR they've decided that's important to them, they're going to be watching a lot of content that's encoded in, and they want to try and get the biggest benefit they can. They need to come to projectorreviews.com and read our reviews, because we're going to tell them, this projector looked good in HDR with HDR content. No, I liked SDR mode on this projector with the majority of my content. And we're not going to get into the weeds like we just did, in this discussion, this theoretical discussion of it. Right?
Exactly. I would just say, first thing, start off with check out our reviews. Make sure you get a projector that delivers good black levels, accurate color, whether you're watching SDR, that it's not glitchy, that if you want the smart features, they function properly. It's not noisy. It fits it has the proper throw distance to work on your screen, and it fits your budget. That's the first thing. And then hopefully, if you find that projector, most of the time those manufacturers take the care to try to get the most out of the HDR as possible. Now, we could talk about this forever, but I just want to make it about a 30-minute thing. So we're going to end it here. However, those people out there, if you have other questions, please put them in the comments. I know half of you guys are going to be like, screw you, you're wrong. But put them in the comments, and then maybe in future sessions, we will also answer, we'll address those as well. So Phil, any other closing comments before we let these people go?
No, I think it's important to reiterate that HDR is visible on a projector, although it's harder to do in the flat panel. I don't believe anybody with the idea that we're saying, oh, don't buy a projector, go get a flat panel. you can actually see the benefits of HDR. You can see the benefits of HDR encoding like Dolby Vision and HDR10 plus. It makes a difference. And there are things you can do on a projector that you cannot do on a flat panel, namely size. You're just not going to get the kind of giant theater-sized picture in your house with a flat panel television.
That's a great one. Like and I'm glad you brought that up. Look, the whole goal is to pull you into what you're watching, to immerse you in what you're looking at. HD, whether it's HDR, SDR, whatever. The goal is to pull you in. And I will tell you that, yeah, sometimes an OLED may do a better job of recreating the colors in the creator's intent. But I would much rather watch a movie, a big epic movie like Dune or something like that, on a 170-inch or 180-inch screen versus a 65-inch. I'm sorry, it's going to be a much better. It's just going to be a much more cinematic experience. We just want to let you guys know that that don't expect the same look on a projector as you do on a TV. And which one's the right one? Neither one can do it properly, because like we just mentioned, most regular flat panels can't do it.
Is it?
So just pick the one that fits your application better. And us, we like big immersive screens. Why measure your TV in inches when you can watch your movies on a screen that's measured in feet? So to me, that's the way to go. All right. So Phil, thank you for coming and hanging out and talking to me. And we're going to start doing these on a regular basis. If you have any, like I said, if you have any comments, please put them into the chat below, and we will make sure we will try to answer some of them along the way. But we're going to cover some more questions that we get asked all the time in future episodes. So that's about it. So take care, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.